Hi, this is Jack Stanley, and I wanted to talk about something I think is kind of fascinating because, when it comes to history, we don't talk about history per se. We kind of talk about our impression of history. And for much of us, for many of us, relating to the history of a period of time is difficult for us because we cannot relate. We cannot sense or understand what it was like. So let me take you for a slight travel back in time to Independence Hall. In Philadelphia, you have Independence Hall. Of course, it's become somewhat sterilized now when you go there. Of course, the interior has been all redone, and it's electrified and heated and modernized, keeping some of its old charm. But the windows are all new, things are all different. But let's go back to the time of the formation of the Declaration of Independence and stuff like that. Now, first off, you have to remember Independence Hall in Philadelphia was where the Second Continental Congress met. See, there was a Continental Congress before the first. And the first Continental Congress met at Carpenter's Hall in 1775. And that contained a number of the famous delegates. You had John Adams, you had Sam Adams, you had George Washington, you had Benjamin Franklin. You had a number of individuals, Hancock and the gang. And from the South, you had a number of individuals as well. And they met in a very, very small room. Now, if you do get a chance to visit Carpenter's Hall, which is probably the most original of any of the structures you go to, and even that's been changed quite a bit, when you would walk through the front door, and that well-worn step as you go in, that has been trod on by countless individuals over hundreds of years. In that structure, when you walk through the front door, there used to be a partition in the middle, and there were rooms on either side. And the First Continental Congress, when you went through the door and you made a left, there was an entrance, there was a small room, enclosed. And that's where the First Continental Congress met. Very small, very tight, and very secret. The interesting thing is that we don't seem to realize many times when we talk about our independence, and basically we hadn't even reached it at that point. In fact, at Carpenter's Hall, John Adams wrote the Declaration of Writs and Grievances, which today, not anybody knows anything about. It's basically sending a letter to the king saying, these are the problems. This is what's getting us upset. And of course, the Congress stayed together, met quietly. Got to remember, they are basically doing lots of things within a British government. And the other thing you have to remember, Carpenter's Hall, of course, had lots of interesting things. There was lots of stuff going on there. And so they were pretty careful minding their P's and Q's. And of course, it was tight. It was close in there. More often than not, they kept the windows closed. And the thing is, nobody bathed. It's pretty nasty, actually. But then again, they were all used to that. Now, the following year, when the Second Continental Congress met, They met in a room of the State House, which we call Independence Hall. And they met, and the courts were not in session, which was across the way. And there wasn't too much in the way of government officials or soldiers and stuff. And there they hammered out the ideas of creating a Declaration of Independence. You know, an interesting thing, we don't talk about it, but how did this whole thing come about? You know, you got to remember, you had the writs and grievances, and they realized they weren't getting anywhere. And so it was decided that one of the more charismatic members of this gathering was Richard Henry Lee. He's very important because he goes down to Virginia and convinces them to push for a separation from the mother country. So he returns to Philadelphia with a proclamation from Virginia stating that these colonies are, and of a right ought to be, free and independent states. And they're absolved from all their allegiance. And this is important stuff. This is saying, basically, in Virginia, they agree. It's time for independence. It's no longer a New England thing, because you have to remember all the stuff dealing with independence at the time. It was a New England thing. And that is why at this point, when we started military campaigns, that the wisdom of John Adams comes into play. First off, Adams is pushing Lee to do what he's doing. Secondly, John Hancock, who is the president of the Second Continental Congress, wants to be the military leader. Now, once again, they're all crammed in here, and they're not happy with each other, okay? And these individuals, these are demagogues from their various areas, and highly intellectual individuals. Not all of them. Some of them were very wealthy and not too bright. Some of them were wealthy and bright. Some of them were neither. Some of them were just bright. But a vast majority of them were individuals of intellectual means. And in many cases, because they wanted them there, because they needed help, individuals of money. And they met, they gathered, they argued, but then the thing is, Hancock wants to be the general. And John Adams realizes that all of the problems, all of the things going on, were taking place in Massachusetts. You know, you go back to all the stuff going on in the beginnings, the Boston Massacre, which was not even a Boston Massacre. It wasn't even a massacre at all. It was actually a bunch of thugs throwing rocks and snowballs at soldiers, hurting the soldiers, hitting them in the head. They were bleeding. And then something happened and the guns went off. But to call that a bunch of innocents is absolute nonsense. But Paul Revere, brilliant, Paul Revere and others, takes that event and twists it around and makes it look like it's an attack by the British. And remember, those British soldiers were brought up on charges of murder and to be hanged. Who came to their aid? John Adams. And he got them acquitted. Pretty amazing. As you go through the history of the formation of this country, you'll discover that perhaps the atlas of American independence, as has been said many times, was John Adams. And so they met, and John Adams nominated George Washington to become commander of our military. There's reasons for that. First off, George Washington, 6'2", came to the Congress every day dressed in his military uniform, kind of stating, I want this. And so Washington is nominated by Adams. This is important because it's no longer a New England event. All of a sudden, Virginia has joined Massachusetts. So now it's not just the North, it's the South working together. This is so important and so often overlooked. Then Adams, working with a committee, pushes Thomas Jefferson, who he said wrote much better than he, to write a document, a declaration. Now the thing is, there had been several declarations written by the Congress, but the Declaration of Independence will be penned mainly by Thomas Jefferson. Now Jefferson was known as the red-headed tombstone. He didn't have a lot of personality. He didn't have a sense of humor at all. I mean, it wasn't easy being with Jefferson at the time. He wrote with his pen. He did not have this wonderful rapport in conversation. He writes it. They battle on it. They vote. They're constantly drinking. And of course, once again, it's the beginnings of summer. It's very hot. The windows are closed. None of them bathe. And also, in the backyard of Independence Hall is the three-holer. What's that? That's the outhouse. And they had their communal brush in salt water. We're just not going to go into too much detail, but you can pretty well figure out what the communal brush was for. And everybody shared that. And so all of this is going on, and they're all tense. They're all fighting with each other because each one has its own ideology, each one of the colonies. And at that time also we become 13 colonies. We had been 12 when we started. Delaware was created. And one more thing, because this is so very, very important. They finally got a document written by Jefferson. And then they had to take all of these various ideologies and put them together. One of the major battles is over slavery. The North wanted to get rid of it. The South said, if you disrupt our peculiar institution, we will not sign your document. And so a careful dance had to be orchestrated. And Franklin, who also had a few slaves, told Adams and Sam Adams was going crazy about this, that one thing at a time. And Sam Adams gave an interesting response that's totally overlooked by history. And he said, if we do not deal with this issue now, we will have to deal with it 100 years hence. Well, 90 years hence, we had our Civil War. Very important. Certain things were taken out of the Declaration of Independence. Things were changed. Franklin put his hands in it. Adams put his hands in it. Of course, then you had, Roger Sherman and Livingston, and you had Rutledge from the South, who really was not at all keen to be a part of it. And then, of course, Dickinson from Pennsylvania, who, although very strong for creating a country, felt that we were unable or unable to accomplish it. And he said, basically, we're setting sail on a skiff made of paper. So all of this is going on, all of these tensions, all of these various things in which nobody wanted to agree on anything. And then came the time when they were getting ready to vote. and perhaps one of the greatest speeches in history was given by John Adams. We don't have what the speech was because he just sat there and spoke from his heart. There was a thunder and lightning storm going on. It was a surreal moment. And through this magnificent speech, and through this driving oratory, through the thunder and lightning, the colonies came together, except for New York, and agreed on independence. Now that was July 2nd, 1776, which is our true Independence Day. July the 2nd, 1776 is when the Declaration of Independence was voted upon and approved. I know, we hear July 4th. Nothing happened on July 4th. The only thing that happened was that John Hancock and the Secretary of Congress signed a small little piece of paper. That's it, just finalizing the vote. But the drama, the event, everything that happened was on July the 2nd. So for as far as I am concerned, to my dying day, I will always recognize July 2nd, 1776, as the birthday of the Declaration of Independence and the first time we took the colonies and took a step together as a solid, unified group. There's a lot of stuff that was going on, and we really don't understand a lot of these people, and a lot of them all had their various personalities, and Franklin held court. Jefferson would always be on the side. He'd be writing. He didn't speak at all. John Adams, you had to try to shut him up. Sam Adams was very pushy. You had the group from the South pushing strongly for slavery. And you had the group from the North pushing very strongly against it. So there was this fine, fine dance. And it was a miracle, if you think about it, in that hot, stifling, smelly, stinky, with lots of people that were drinking far too much. But that was common practice in those days. You drank all day. And together they created, and they became one. And I think the next time you go to Independence Hall, and you walk in there and you see it so sterilized and so clean and so... That's not the way it was. There was a very good chance that this thing was going to blow up. And if it had not been for the dogged nature of individuals like John Adams, the Atlas of American Independence, there's a very good chance it might have totally and completely collapsed. Treasure July 2nd, and treasure the memory of John Adams. Far, far too little is spoken of him. And there should be a monument in Washington, D.C. There should be monuments all over to that individual who basically was the cheerleader for what would become the Declaration of Independence.